Hi, I'm Radical Liberation, self-declared King of the Moon, coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri in these United States. Not sure we're going to have Mad Mercenary today. He was up late, I noticed, working on the merch store. In fact, let's just go right to that because whether he makes it or not, he's been doing stuff for you. Wait, just a sec. Avoid the infinity cam, which I don't like. Oh, here he is. Here he is. Just in time, sir. We are live, and I'm about to show off something on the merch store. Yes, new design, right? Line go up, much requested, I think, right, Madmark?
Yes, this is correct. Finally, we've been able to get up a few more designs.
Oh, more. I had only seen line go up. So let me show line go up. And there we go. Okay, yes, so, and then let me go back.
The inside joke.
Ooh,
second from the right.
This is new, right?
Correct.
The bow tie.
Awesome. Bow tie, yes.
Little hint of where we're going with the show a little bit. And then, okay, so bow tie and line go up are the new ones, right?
Yes, bow tie and line go up.
Excellent.
Burger, I'm not sleepy, I'm sick.
Oh, no. Yeah, I saw you were up late working on the merch store. I didn't know if that's because you couldn't get to sleep, or it sounds like maybe there's another reason.
Yeah, so I was up last night, I think till 2:30 in the morning, working on merch store stuff, trying to get a bit more presentable, but yeah.
Cool.
So I'm operating on 3 hours of sleep and going through a bad cold.
Oh,
so
bummer.
Excuse me if I misspeak.
And I will just highlight this one because, oh wait, how do I just see the design? Here we go. Yeah, I'll highlight this one simply to say that I got myself a workout. I'd like to use like a jersey style, you know, the sleeves that kind of go down to your elbows. I got a jersey style using the Did We Really Win design that is a sort of a personal favorite of mine. But that's not all. We also have the bow tie and the line go up, which is very cleverly designed, I have to say. Mad Merc, really fun.
Thank you.
Let it be said with the typology or whatever, right? That's a trick you see in some famous designs. Okay. Right. So let me see what else I wanted to cover before we get going. Line go up. Oh, yeah. Academic agency. Could just bring that up. There we go. AA wanted everybody to know that the 25% off spring sale, this is your last chance. So jump on that to get 25% off. In particular, a number of things are of interest. The recently completed Trivium, but in particular of interest to this show, if you're finding that economics seems like something that helps you understand the world, he has Foundations of Economics, which 25% off is really helpful when purchasing Foundations of Economics. It is a very serious course. Okay, and then I know this has been, I've been breaking from our neat and clean structure very slightly, Mad Merc, by basically touching on inflation briefly every week, regardless of whether it's an Econ Mini or not. Our main topic is not inflation today, but I just wanted to keep an eye on it because every week I hear something that makes me wonder what's going on. This one is interesting because Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, made some comments about inflation and then had to follow up with some comments about saying, no, don't worry, it'll be okay. We got it all under control. But our friend on Twitter, right, I think it might have been Angry Mandrill, is his username. I believe he pointed this story out to us and said, if even they are talking about it, then that's got to have you worried. So this is not a story this time about how high some prices are, though I've been seeing those too, but just the fact that at this high level, the Treasury Secretary of the United States, is making a comment about inflation, it means that they can't pretend it's not happening anymore. So interesting. So any comments on the inflation stuff, Mad Merc?
There's no good news.
Yeah, that's true. Everything I'm saying, I wasn't going to go into detail because that's not our topic right now, but this week. But I have to say, not only the story that we're highlighting here, but anything else I'm seeing is showing the same thing. Just, different news in different sectors pointing to rising prices. So we'll see. And we've covered that. And if you go back our last several shows, you'll see a number of things that are strongly related to this topic and understanding what's going on around us, and maybe even giving you a hint about how to take care of yourself in times like these. So that is that. I am going to start with George Reisman, I think. First thing I want to do. Go ahead. You have something else?
A couple more things. We just have one more thing to show, which is the flag competition. The flag competition that is running in our Discord. Guys, if you don't know what's happening, we are running a competition. We do this every year, apparently. Last year we did currency. This year we're doing flags for a city-state. If you join the Discord server, link in the description, you will find how you can join that competition. It's very simple. All you have to do is create a flag for a city-state. This city-state can be fictional or real. It can be historical or just made up imaginary. All that we ask is that you put a short description of the city-state you're doing the flag for, a description of a flag and all the symbols and colors and their meanings, and who created the flag. So if it's a group effort, we want that all the group members be submitted. And we just ask that everyone get involved, everyone have a good time. We already have a lot of submissions, some very professional submissions, some very funny submissions. It's going to be a great time at the end of the year when we review them with our good friends and art critics. They provided some good entertainment last time. So yeah, we hope to have everyone get involved, everyone to join. And this is just our way to get involved with the community more, and for the community to interact and have a show dedicated to you guys, because it's really you guys that help us and strive us forward to make our show better and make ourselves better. The first place will be getting silver. In what quantity hopefully is better, more than last year. So last year, first place got 3 coins of silver. Second place got 2, and third place got 1. Hopefully this year we'll be able to boost that up a bit because of some new revenue streams that we have created, such as the merch store, which you should all go have a look at. But yes, we're running that. Please get involved. It's really a lot of fun. And we continue with the show.
Yeah, and part of it, obviously, is that it's a chance to underscore, by rather than sending, I don't know, Amazon gift cards or fiat money of some sort. We want to send you some what at one time was commodity money, right, in some form. So sort of a little bit of a hard money emphasis there in terms of the prizes, which is sort of part of the whole thing, right? So anyway, it's really fun, and the design element was very strong last time. That sort of I didn't sort of expect that had to do in part with the judges, right? Is that we were really doing some serious analysis of the design, which was really interesting because I'm not a big design guy, so I was learning and finding it fascinating.
Right. I mean, again, this is something that everyone gets involved with. We have a bit of fun with it, but we are also serious because there is silver on the line, and who knows where silver is going in the future? Because with all the inflation that we've been seeing, might be a good way to get some cheap way to get some. You don't have to buy it.
We have a question, Mad Merc. Jonathan Gordon asks, "When's the deadline?" I'm not sure we've established it yet. Before the end of the year, but not quite yet. Right.
Right. It will depend on a few factors, including my own schedule and depending on how next week goes.
Right.
For those who don't know, I will not be here next week. Again,
Right.
I have things going on in my personal life that are hectic, and if everything goes well, I may need to make an announcement on the future of the show. But
Right.
we'll cross that bridge if and when we get to it. But for now, the deadline is up in the air, but it will be before the end of the year.
Yeah, and just to be clear, when Mad Merc says things going on in his personal life, these are good things.
Hopefully.
Yeah, right. Okay, so turning to our main topic today, I wanted to start by introducing the author of the speech article. I actually heard it as a speech. I'll talk more about that in a moment. I'm going to let myself be the star for just a moment, sir, because I want to show something to everybody. Okay, this is a book I'm working on right now. We just did went through an article recently by Jesus Huerta de Soto, Money, Bank Credit, and Economic Cycles. This is a no joke of a book. I'm just starting on it. Let me show you Capitalism by today's author, George Reisman, in comparison. Sorry, trying to figure out how to get it on camera. There we go. Yeah, so that's Jesus Huerta de Soto. There's Capitalism. It's giant. Here's the thickness, okay? And you're thinking, yeah, okay, so it's big. It's probably got, big type, easy reading for older people type, lots of pictures. Well, not exactly. It's a dense
Bible
1,000 page tome, which I have to admit I have not read. I think I might have read certain portions. I want to mention I met at the Mises Institute. We made a lot of friends while we were there, and I met a professor and her student who had a co-authored paper they were presenting. And to prepare for this student, who's a freshman, I believe, in college, had read Capitalism by Reisman. And I was like, wait, you're talking about the big book, Capitalism? She said, yeah, I wanted to be ready for the conference. So I went ahead and read that. And I'm like, whoa, wow, you're going places, lady. So anyway, that is his huge tome. And he quotes from it. Part of it is just to let you know, Reisman is one of the Austrian economists who has written a treatise like Human Action by Mises or Man, Economy, and State by Rothbard. Reisman's written a whole book where he tries to basically cover it all, and a lot of valuable contributions are in there, I think. I know about aspects of the book, even though I haven't read it all myself, right? So 20 years ago, go ahead.
So what you're saying is, I made a joke before that looks like the Bible, but it literally is the Bible for Austrian economics.
Yeah, right. It's one of them. So this is actually, it turns out, the 20-year anniversary this year, even this spring, of George Reisman giving a speech that I happened to be in attendance at. And I found it just electrifying. And it is that talk in the form of a paper that we'll be looking at today. What I remember is that it made a big impression on me. I've been to many, many events at the Mises Institute, heard many talks. This made a big impression on me. I remember the room we were in. I kind of can picture it. I remember the enthusiastic reaction of the audience. I remember discussing an objection I had to a relatively minor point with to something George Reisman said with David Gordon afterwards. I mean, this one was really, it was one for the books, it was a big event. And so I've been waiting to go over this on the show. Not sure why I was waiting, but I did actually briefly share just a tidbit when we went through history of economics, history of economic thought recently. And I wanted to introduce Karl Monger. Karl Monger is the founder of the Austrian school in the late, like 1871. I think his Principles of Economics was published, and that marks really the beginning of the Austrian School of Economics. Reisman is going to draw on Karl Monger in particular. Some people pronounce his name Menger, M-E-N-G-E-R, but I'm told that a better pronunciation of the Austrian name is Monger, Karl Monger. And someone has asked for a link to the book, and I do like to do that. As you can imagine with the size of the book, I'm betting it's not 1999. Oh, it's actually not bad. And it's on Kindle if you want it that way. So let me just share that with you guys. Thank you for prompting me. I really do like to share links. Here we go. There we go. There's a link to Reisman's Capitalism. And while I'm thinking about things I should have shared, here's a link to that article about Yellen and inflation. And then here's the thing we'll be going over today. So all the links right there. Okay, so so it's epic. I think you'll find, I hope, that this is of great interest. Okay, so I'm going to share the article, my marked up, as usual, my marked up article here. And in fact, that face you see is not George Reisman. It is Karl Monger, because it's, to a great degree, he's really drawing out some points of Monger and using it to address environmentalism. And I guess I should say sort of environmentalism as we know it now, which tends to talk about how we're using up all the Earth's resources and we're going to run out of them, and there's, we're going to boil the planet and we're going to run out of oil, and all that kind of environmentalism is what Reisman's addressing here. I'm sure there's other kinds of environmentalism that are better or something, but that's what he's addressing here. And he starts by explaining that environmentalism is really a product. The modern environmentalist movement is really a product of economic ignorance combined with the collapse of the Soviet Union. How is that? Well, let me walk you through a little of what he says here. He says that, sorry, some lines I marked just because I thought they were good lines and wasn't necessarily for the show. Okay. Yeah, okay, so he says the same. Let me make sure I'm not missing the part I wanted to hit here. Did I miss it? Sorry, give me just a moment. I had myself all organized. Here we go. Yeah. So, he says that he sees the modern environmentalist movement as in continuity with the Marxists or socialists of earlier, say the first half of the 20th century, say. And he says, on a surface appearance, you could say that they're quite different because those socialists back then were emphasizing totalitarian control of all aspects of human life, as he says here. But now you hear this emphasis on we've got to stop messing with the planet. We've got to have a light touch on the planet and all that. He says you could say a sort of policy of laissez-faire, but laissez-faire toward nature, right? So what's going on here? He says, first of all, it's not a policy, obviously. The environmentalists are not pushing a policy of laissez-faire towards people, right? They should be as tightly controlled as ever, if not more so. It's a policy of laissez-faire toward nature in the raw. The alleged harmonies that are to be respected are those of so-called ecosystems. So they've suddenly become the kindler and gentler left-wingers. They used to run concentration camps or whatever. Now, for the kulaks, now they just want us to let nature be beautiful and so forth. That, of course, will require some social control. And he says, so earlier he talked about intellectuals turning against reason and science and technology in recent times. They have continued to support socialism and oppose capitalism, but now they do it in the form of environmentalism. Environmentalism's goal of global limits on carbon dioxide and other chemical emissions, as called for in the Kyoto Treaty, easily lends itself to the establishment of worldwide central planning with respect to a wide variety of essential means of production. So what is he saying? He's saying the justification has perhaps changed. The rhetoric and justification has changed. But it seems like the end state ends up being pretty similar. That is massive central planning. In this case, not just in the Soviet Union, but worldwide, right? Because if anyone anywhere is, emitting carbon dioxide, then we'll have global warming, right? So we can't just take care of this in one nation. It has to be a global plan, a global central plan. So that's the first thing he does, is he just says, there's a certain family similarity here between the socialist movement of the past and the environmentalist movement of today.
Right.
So that's interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, right. And we see that this, and I believe he points out in the article here, this lends itself very handily into slotting into the global governance political agenda. And so we often see this in the framing of the situation, since this is a global effort, only global solutions matter, and therefore we need a global governance structure or government that would enforce these environmental laws to solve the issue that affects every human on the planet. Well, perhaps noble and naive in its thinking, this obviously also lends itself, once this sort of global structure or global governance is established, to act like any other government or governmental structure, in the sense that it will continue to grow. And many of the founders of many of these environmental movements, as I think we'll get into very shortly in this article, point out that their inspirations were very much Marxist, at the very least, based.
Right, and that's what he's going to point out. I just wanted to, building off what you said, point out that once again, as with international communism, opposed to the awful nationalists, we once again see this divide, right? Where people on one side are calling themselves populists or nationalist populists, things like this, and the other side talk a lot about globalism, and key player seems to somehow be the World Economic Forum, which just seems to come up like all the time for some reason. I have no idea why they're so important. Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum. But you get the theme, right? The theme is global, international institutions, international governance. And what is on the naughty list is local, national, decentralized control, right? We can't have that. We can't solve global problems with local solutions, right? That seems to be the theme. So so he's saying there certainly seems to be sort of a family resemblance here in terms of the goals of the movement, the socialist movement and the environmentalist movement. But he says it goes further than this. There is an explicit bridge between socialism and environmentalism. And that, he says, you can see it in one of the most prominent theorists of the environmental movement, a man named Barry Commoner, who happened to be the Green Party's first candidate for president of the United States. And here's the bridge. Marx, as you might know, predicted the progressive impoverishment of the wage earners under capitalism. That is, his prediction was the extra, as he saw it, the extra value created by the worker would be basically stolen from them by the capitalist, down to the point where basically the worker barely had enough to make ends meet, right? Just barely keep them alive so they can keep working, but don't let them actually benefit from their production and become also middle class or rich or something like that. Obviously, this is not at all what's happened under capitalist systems. The middle class has boomed since the Industrial Revolution. But anyway, never mind that. That is what Marx's prediction was. And some have noticed that it hasn't come true. Well, Commoner has an explanation for this. This is kind of clever in a way. Think about this. What's prevented his prediction, Marx's prediction, from coming true until now is only that capitalism has temporarily been able to exploit the environment. But that's going to come to an end, right? Peak oil and run out of everything and all that, boil the planet, whatever. That's going to come to an end. And so the inherent conflict between the capitalists and the workers is going to emerge in full force. Okay. And worth noting, he has it in a parenthetical, but if you're intrigued by this bit of intellectual history he's done here, in his book, Capitalism, he says he quotes Commoner at length, and I assume critiques him. And here's, in fact, a passage from Reisman's massive book. I'm going to read the whole paragraph. This is great stuff. The only difference I can see, says Reisman, between the green movement of the environmentalists and the old red movement of the communists and socialists is the superficial one of the specific reasons for which they want to violate individual liberty and the pursuit of happiness. The Reds claimed that the individual could not be left free because the result would be such things as exploitation, monopoly, and depressions. The Greens claim that the individual cannot be left free because the result will be such things as destruction of the ozone layer, acid rain, and global warming. Both claim that centralized government control over economic activity is essential. The Reds wanted it for the alleged sake of achieving human prosperity. The Greens want it for the alleged sake of avoiding environmental damage. And in the end, both the Reds and the Greens want someone to suffer and die. The one, the Reds, the capitalists and the rich, for the alleged sake of the wage earners and the poor. The other, a major portion of all mankind, for the alleged sake of the lower animals and inanimate nature. So that's his. That's how Reisman sees the connection between the Reds and the Greens, and it's quite interesting that in Commoner, Barry Commoner, he sees an intellectual figure that actually bridges these things, where Commoner is trying to explain what went wrong with Marx's predictions. The great Marx, he couldn't have really been wrong. Well, he'll be right eventually once we burn through the Earth's resources, and then we'll see that conflict between capitalists and workers explode, right?
Essentially, he's predicting that we are living on borrowed time due to the limited resources of the Earth.
Right.
But as we'll get into, this is a flawed set of thinking because it discounts human knowledge and human ingenuity, and for us to create new resources, to create new ways of using the abundance of the natural universe, and it limits us only to Earth. No, I'm not going to give it all away. I'm not giving it all away. Don't worry. But just as a preamble to all of this, it's humans' ability to reason that allows us to grow our resource base, that allows us to use new things, and as we're going to get into.
Yeah, right. Okay, so what he wants to do here, the talk is called Environmentalism Refuted. And so he is trying to refute two claims of the environmentalists, two essential claims. One is that continued economic progress is impossible because of the impending exhaustion of natural resources. And he says it is this, from this, the notion, the slogan, reduce, reuse, recycle comes. We've got to reduce our use of natural resources. We've got to reuse what we've already used before. We've got to recycle to slow down that impending exhaustion, right? To try to stave off the day that it comes collapsing down on us, the lack of natural resources. So that's one. We're about to exhaust the natural resources. Number two, continued economic progress, indeed, much of the economic progress that we have had up to now is destructive of the environment and is therefore dangerous, right? So this is a standard claim you hear. This is the Greta Thunberg claim, right? We are destroying the planet for our children. We're doing damage to the environment, and we're leaving them as an inheritance, a planet that's about to run out of natural resources, and it's just, we're handing them disaster on a plate, right? So those are the essential claims. Now, here's the essential policy prescription. So based on those two claims, what do they think we should do? The essential policy prescription of the environmentalists is the prohibition of self-interested individual action, insofar as the byproduct of such action, when performed on a mass basis, is alleged damage to the environment. And so, of course, the leading example right now is global warming. And because of global warming, we have got to prohibit individuals from doing certain things. We've got to mandate, you can probably help me come up with examples, Matt Merck, but some countries are, or I guess the state of California, maybe other places, they're moving towards mandating electric cars. So basically outlawing fossil fuel cars. Can you think of a couple other examples of the legislation that's happening?
I know there are a few nations around the world, for example, who have implemented laws that state once technology has reached a point, for example, let's take cars. Once technology has reached a point where there can be a truly carbon neutral car or a carbon negative car, all manufacturers and all distributors of cars must sell those cars. Mm-hmm. So I believe in some European states there's this law, and I think there's some of these sorts of laws in California. I'm not sure if it's around vehicles, but it is. There are other forms of legislation that encourage future sales of these carbon cars by force. Carbon neutral cars by force.
So it's not going to be a natural sort of organic move towards these things as people, see the benefits of them or decide that, well, maybe they're a little more expensive, but they're better for the planet, so I'm going to choose to do that. No, this is going to be shoved down our throat. I mean, that's right. That's what they're moving towards. They're going to make us save the environment, whether we want to or not.
Correct. And just like any other government program, there will be unintended consequences because it will, again, prohibit the development of other technologies, which could be even better. Right. There's an opportunity cost.
Okay, so how is he going to go after the environmentalist ideas here? Well, first, he's breaking this up. He's very logical and organized. He's presented two claims and one policy prescription. So for a while, we're just going to be focusing on those two claims of the environmentalists. We'll get to the policy prescription at the end. So to go after those two claims, those two essential claims of the environmentalists, he's going to deploy Karl Monger, founder of the Austrian school, Karl Monger's theory of goods. Now, this might sound a little, dry economic theorizing, but bear with me. It very quickly becomes exciting if you just focus just a little to get this. And you see then how Reisman is able to deploy thinking logically about what we mean by an economic good. It just flips everything over. This is just great. Okay. So what is his theory of the goods? What does that mean? That means Monger's thinking about what makes something an economic good. Like there's lots of things in the universe, right? There's, the Alpha Centauri out there in the stars, right? But that is not an economic good. Alpha Centauri doesn't function as an economic good. It has no price. What is the price for Alpha Centauri? You don't even know how to think about that question, right? What do you mean? There's not a price on Alpha Centauri. Well, why not? Well, it's because it's not an economic good. So what does it mean to be an economic good? That's what Monger breaks down here. So what makes what would otherwise be mere things into goods is not the intrinsic properties of the things, but a man-made relationship between the physical properties of the things and the satisfaction of human needs or wants. So it's because something can be brought into use for humans, that's when it becomes an economic good, right? So That's part of the problem with Alpha Centauri. Sure, we all think it's pretty or whatever in the sky, but we can't have it help us meet any good beyond just the free, non-economic, non-scarce thing of everyone can look in the sky and see it, right? So what is it that makes it a good, or as he often uses, as Monger often puts it, what gives a thing good's character? Okay, there's 4 things. First, you've got to have a human need. 2, properties in the thing that can help satisfy that need. But that's not enough. In fact, those 2 are the easy parts. The rest of the paper almost is going to be about number 3 and 4. So you've got the need and you've got the thing with the that can meet the need, right? But now you need 2 more critical things. Human knowledge of that connection. So just because, God knows that, throughout human history, the petroleum could be used as oil, it didn't mean that people knew that, right? We had to figure it out. So number 3 is that knowledge of that connection between the properties of the thing can meet the human need. And then number 4, and this is also so critical, is you've got to have command of the thing. So let's say we find out that if you could fly people right up near Alpha Centauri, it would cure their cancer. So we would have the human need, that is, I'd like to be able to cure cancer for people, right? Number 2, the thing has the properties. Alpha Centauri cures cancer if you get close enough. Number 3, we've figured this out somehow, let's imagine. It's not an economic good. Still doesn't matter. Still doesn't have a price. Still doesn't help us cure cancer because we don't have command of it. At this time, we do not have the technology to travel to Alpha Centauri and make use of Alpha Centauri to cure cancer, right? So you've got to have the need, have something that can meet the need. Number 3, knowledge of that. And then number 4, command of it, actually able to get access to it, or transform it into being able to meet the need you have. And he stresses in particular, the reason we're going to talk more about 3 and 4 is because 3 and 4 are the man-made parts. The human need, let's say the need to be cured of cancer, right? That's not something we made. That's just a problem we have in the world, right? And the fact that maybe something could help cure cancer, that's just a property of, the plant or the star or whatever it is that we think could help. That's just there in nature. It's 3 and 4 that we can do something about. What can we do about 3, human knowledge? Well, that's science, right? That's the enterprise of learning more about the world and how it can help us solve problems. And 4, command of the thing is something that comes about through the economic process. As he puts it, command is established by means of a process of capital accumulation and a rising productivity of labor. So as we get more economically advanced, we are able to get more command over things. And he's going to give some really good examples shortly here. So the point is, the resources provided by nature, iron, aluminum, coal, petroleum, so on and so forth, are not automatically goods. Their goods character must be created by man. Created in the sense that we discover the knowledge and we establish command over the thing so we can then use it to satisfy a human need. So, concrete examples. Iron, present in the earth since the formation of the planet throughout the entire presence of man on earth, did not become a good until well after the Stone Age had ended. Petroleum is really quite recent in history. It's hard for everybody to remember because it's such a part of our lives now. It had been present in the ground for millions of years, he says. It did not become a good until the middle of the 19th century. So that's, less than 200 years ago, we figured out about petroleum. Aluminum, radium, and uranium also became goods only within the last century or century and a half, right? So this thing he's talking about of getting the knowledge and having the command of it, that is something that has changed really recently. There are things that are a central part of how we function now that our, great grandparents or whatever didn't know about. didn't know how to use it to meet needs, right? So an example he gives of goods character being created only after the establishment of command, being able to get to it, be able to use it, right? As drilling equipment has improved, command was established over deposits, petroleum deposits lying at greater and greater depths. So those deposits that were too deep at one time were just things, stuff, right? But once we could get to them, they became economic goods. They started to get a price. Why? They have a price because we can do something with them. Similarly, petroleum deposits containing a significant sulfur content were completely unusable and were not goods. And then Rockefeller and Standard Oil developed the process of cracking petroleum molecules, and that made the sulfurous deposits usable. So that was stuff where they knew it had the potential to maybe be useful, but they couldn't really do anything with it until they figured out that technology to crack petroleum molecules. Okay? Okay. Then, next aspect of Monger's theory of goods that is relevant to the essential environmentalist claims is that the starting point both of goods character and of the value of goods is within us, within human beings, and radiates outward from us to external things. People who have been watching the show know where this is going. This is consumer goods, goods of the first order, the stuff we actually go and buy and directly use. And then the means that are used to produce the goods of the first order, and then the means that are used to produce those, and so on and so forth, right? Higher order goods we talk about. But the point is the value radiates from the human. The human is the one who wants that consumer good, and therefore the thing that is used to make that consumer good is valuable, and therefore the thing before that is valuable, and so on and so forth. So value radiates from humans outward towards goods. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just about to say, you're completely right on this point, because higher order goods, unless their lower order goods have value, they don't have value. So
right.
If no one wanted bread or cupcakes or whatever wheat is used for, if no one wanted any of that sort of stuff in their diets, then we would have no use for wheat. And then there would be no use for flour, and there would be no use for all the other products that go into that particular consumable good. And what we find very clearly is that everything emanates from the individual and in the individual's subjective needs. Now, again, we've been quite extensively over that, how individual needs are subjective and ordinal, and we rank them all, but we're adding a few more layers to this, and how it can affect the whole of society, and how it can be used for this environmental issue. And we'll get into that very clearly.
Okay, so
don't worry, I've been coughing a lot as well.
Yeah. So he says the process of production appears as one of continuous enhancement of utility. That means that, why is he talking about this value radiating outward? It's because the thing at the highest order, as you go from the consumer good back, first we made this tool to make the thing, but to make the tool, we had to process metal into a certain shape. But to do that, we had to get the metal. To get the metal, we had to get it out of the mine. Back. What do you get to eventually? What's the highest order of goods? And that is the raw materials from nature, right? And so what he's saying is, starting with those raw materials and then moving towards the consumer, value is gained as it gets closer and closer to the consumer. And he says what that means is that nature's contribution to natural resources is much less than is generally supposed. This is a really weird thing to think about here, right? What nature has provided, according to Monger, is the material stuff and the physical properties of the deposits and the mines and the wells and so forth, right? But it's not provided the goods character of any of them. Indeed, there was a time when none of them were goods, right? you imagine, I don't know, primitive man or whatever, and almost nothing. All the things that we know, wow, you're sitting on top of a diamond mine or a oil well, or you could have an oil well there. Completely meaningless to go back in time and say this to these people, right? I mean, what would they do about it? None of these things were economic goods for them, right?
Right. So think about raw iron. I'm sure everyone has perhaps seen these YouTube channels where it's these people who go through history and they try and relive stages of advancement in human society, or perhaps these primitive channels who build, like, I don't know, mansions out of a few sticks. What we find is that for most people, if you had today at least, and back in the Stone Age, if you had a raw piece of iron that it was just on the surface of the ground, like some Indians from Ohio did, then that would be completely useless to you, because you do not have any use for it, because you don't know what it is, you don't have any knowledge of it, you don't have any use for it. It's completely vague. It's just another rock.
Yeah.
But once you have that command of the material, once you have the knowledge, and once you have the desire to use something with it, as in you have that want, that initial want, then it starts to become valuable. But again, what you can do with that iron has many different uses, and that's where the value comes from. And so the value that Mother Nature has provided, or God has provided, depending on your beliefs, is that initial starting point of the material. But
Right.
the value itself comes from what you can do with it. And that
Right.
what you can do with it is only limited by your imagination and your reasoning.
Right. And just to put it more dramatically, Madmerg, I remember reading that land that had petroleum, actually that reduced the value of the land dramatically. Why?
Correct.
Because if it actually oozed up and came out onto your land, well, you couldn't grow crops on it, right? I mean, oil is not a great thing to have on your farmland, right? So at one time, it's not that people didn't know about this stuff. They knew about it and they hated it. Then they avoided it. They're like, get rid of this, offload this land on some sucker, because this is terrible. You can't do anything with this land, right? It was not just useless. It was actually a negative. It was viewed negatively. It brought negative value until we figured out what we could do with it, right?
Well, think about this historical example. Dutch Royal Shell set up a kerosene oil rig, because before, oil was there to create kerosene for lamps. This is the big thing with Standard Oil. They had the monopoly in North America and Europe, as we know. And this is the big oil wars that happened. But originally you used to have whales that people got kerosene from, and then we discovered that there was petroleum in the ground, and you could extract kerosene for lamps. But what Dutch Royal Shell used to do is they had this byproduct, and this byproduct was petroleum, or gasoline, as Americans would call it. And they would just dump it in a giant hole off the coast and set it alight, and it would be used as a lighthouse. And only 20 years later did they find out that if you remove the sulfur content of this petroleum, it can be used quite effectively as fuel. And they wasted, and because they didn't have that knowledge at the time, they didn't have that knowledge 20 years ago, and they had wasted millions and millions of dollars by simply just burning this product in a giant hole off the coast of Indonesia for fishermen to use as a lighthouse.
Wow.
But they didn't know. They didn't know because they didn't have the knowledge.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So summarizing his point, and then this is where Reisman adds his turns it up to 11, right? So summarizing Monger's point one more time, the goods character of natural resources, according to Monger, is created by man when he discovers the properties they possess that render them capable of satisfying human needs, and when he gains command over them, sufficient to direct them to the satisfaction of human needs. Now, there's only one thing that needs to be added to bring it home to environmentalism here, and that's a precise, explicit recognition of the extent of the things Monger refers to that nature has provided, and which are not yet goods, but which, under the appropriate circumstances, could become goods. So what has nature provided? Well, with our understanding of science that we have now, we could make it pretty simple. Nature's provided matter and energy. Matter's in the form of all the chemical elements, known and yet unknown, and energy in all its various forms, sunlight and so forth, right? So there are two senses of the expression natural resources. One is natural resources as provided by nature, right? They're just raw, you could say, raw nature, right?
The highest order goods.
The highest order goods, right? Secondly, are natural resources to which man has given goods character, right? So this is the difference then between, the oil that is too deep for us to reach right now, and when people talk about peak oil and they say, well, there's only a certain reserve of oil. Well, they're not talking about the oil that's deep down in the ground that we can't get to at the moment. They're talking about oil that's already been gathered and stored and is in some sense ready to be used. And has a price, right? Which gives you the tip. It has become an economic good at that point, right? So hopefully you're already starting to sense where this is going, right? By making this distinction between raw nature, natural resources, and economic goods, natural resources, the world starts to look a little bit differently, right? Okay. First thing to say about raw nature, natural resources as provided by nature, is the enormity of their quantity. For all practical purposes, they are infinite. Strictly speaking, they are one and the same with all the matter and energy in the universe. That is the full extent of the natural resources supplied by nature. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but we can't use Alpha Centauri, and we can't use the thing 10,000 feet under the ground. It's like, not yet. Not yet, right? At one time, we didn't know what to do with petroleum or iron, right? And now we do. So we're on a bit of a journey in our relationship with nature, right? Taking that raw matter and energy and figuring out what to do with it to have it meet human needs.
Right. So this is the technology, our human reasoning, our knowledge, increasing, expanding our time horizons and our possibilities. This is what our ability as individuals, remember that the collective cannot reason, but the individual can reason and innovate and create. Excuse me. Sorry. And what we're finding is that with this innovation, not only has our ability to use goods for their current use increased in the time horizon, but we have expanded our horizon itself in what the goods can be used for.
Right.
So originally, let's go back to our example of petroleum.
Yeah.
Originally, petroleum was only used for very large machinery. It was used for kerosene lamps. It was used for a very limited amount of goods. And now, I beg you to find me a product in the world that doesn't use a petroleum-based asset. Paint.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, just think paints, pharmaceutical products, wood dyes, plastics. How much plastic is there in the world? That's all petroleum-based. All of it.
Right. Yep. Right. So even he's saying that it was what 19th century, mid 19th century or something that we figured out that petroleum could be used as sort of basic fuel, just get energy out of it, right? But then I guess things we're talking about here, Mad Merc, isn't that what they mean by petroleum byproducts?
Yes.
What they mean is, as opposed to just getting energy out of it, we also use parts of what's left over after we get the energy out to make plastic and so on and so forth, right? So that whole petroleum byproduct development wasn't, even Rockefeller didn't have a clue about that, right? That was even later, I think. Even more recent is my point.
Right,
so
right.
This dynamic process he's talking about, I mean, it's almost in living memory that some of these things were not, that we didn't know how to do these things, and we've just figured them out. When you consider the span of human history, we just figured out like a lot really recently, right? How to use nature.
Right. And we have not to be overly optimistic here, but we're going to go on to this. We are most definitely going to go on to this in this paper. This is just us being limited with the resources available to us on our planet. This is just us being limited to what we have at our fingertips. What if we reached out? What if we reached out to the stars, to the cosmos, and used the resource limitless in comparison to what we have at our fingertips on our planet?
Right. Yep. Yes. That's part of the reason I was excited to share this paper. Not only is it, I think once we get through it, you'll see it just flips your whole view of this environmentalist discussion, but it's kind of inspiring, right? I mean, it's like when I read about the early scientists, who were Christians, right, in medieval Europe, and they're talking about the wonder of seeing God's design of nature and discovering it, and seeing that there's laws and regularities. And of course, they're useful, right? But what I was particularly struck by is sort of a poetic reaction to sort of the beauty of what they were discovering. That there's sense and reason to how our world works, and we can find it. God has given us the tools of, reason and so forth, so that we can find his fingerprints, so to speak, on nature, right? Well, that to me is part of what I feel when I read this paper, is that that sort of excitement of, rather than this sort of gloomy, pessimistic view that, everything's running out, we're all going to be, it's going to be Mad Max any day now, right? Post-apocalyptic nightmare scenario. It could be, but that would just be our choice, right? That would be because of what man chooses to do. That's not imposed on us by nature. Nature is, as he says here, infinite and boundless, right?
Right.
Okay.
It's the situation of, you got to keep moving. You have to keep innovating. You have to keep expanding your time horizons and your vision horizons so that you can see more opportunities and do more with different goods for a longer amount of time. And that comes from fostering a system that helps with innovation, that has innovation at its heart. And the only system that people have reasoned out that helps with the innovation of goods for the satisfaction of individuals' needs is laissez-faire.
Right.
The only system.
Okay, so remember those two senses of natural resources. One is things that are like ready for us to use, usable, accessible. We know what to do with them, right? And the other is natural resources in the sense of just stuff, matter and energy that's around us. We haven't quite figured out what to do with almost all of it, right? We're really using just a small fraction of what's all around us. So he says, in one sense, in the sense of natural resources that are economic goods, the contribution of nature is zero. Practically nothing comes to us from nature that is ready-made as a usable, accessible natural resource. And you can think of some exceptions, right? Certain fruits, berries, you can go and you can just pull them off and eat them, right? But short of those, when you start getting into pulling stuff out of the earth and shaping it into a tool and all that, you got to put a lot of people, ingenuity and power into that to take raw nature and make it something that's useful to us. So in that sense, the contribution of nature is, as he says, zero, or almost practically zero. In another sense, however, in the sense of natural resources as things, that just the stuff that comes from nature, the raw matter and energy, it's virtually infinite in its extent. So in this sense, nature's contribution is boundless. We're not running out of raw nature. There's a lot of it, right? So he says, the entire mass of the Earth and all of the energy that goes with it from thunderstorms in the atmosphere, a single one of which discharges more energy than all of mankind produces in an entire year. To the tremendous heat found at the Earth's core in millions of cubic miles of molten iron and nickel, the Earth, the enormous Earth, consists of solidly packed chemical elements. It's just waiting transformation by man into natural resources that are goods, that actually help us meet our needs. So man has the ability to go on indefinitely increasing the supply of natural resources that are goods, and he enlarges the supply of usable, accessible natural resources as he expands his knowledge, number 3 in Monger's list, right? And physical power over, number 4, nature. So as he expands his knowledge of and physical power over nature, we take that raw nature and turn it into something that helps us with our lives, right? Helps us live, survive, have fun sometimes. Let's contrast that with the prevailing view that dominates the thinking of the environmentalists and the conservationists, that there is a scarce, precious stock of natural resources, that man's productive activity serves merely to deplete. He says that's wrong. Man's productive activity serves to enlarge the supply of the usable natural resources by converting a larger, though still so tiny, fraction of nature into natural resources that we can actually use, right? So they focus on, and I think part of the reason is they're not making this distinction between the two meanings of natural resources. So in the peak oil, they would talk about oil reserves and stuff like that. Well, sure, you can always do that. You can always say, here's how much we've actually spent the time and the energy and had the knowledge to pull out and turn into something that's sitting there as a sort of a backup of something we can use, just barrels of oil are just sitting around and they're tanks of oil sitting around various places. We can count all that up and say, well, it's not that much, right? Well, okay, yes, but we'll make more, right? And it's such a small fraction of what's available from the Earth. And we can expand it. So expand your thinking then is this is what I love about this paper. Look at the world anew. Man's physical power over the world has been essentially confined to about the 30% of the Earth's surface that is not covered by seawater. And it has been further confined to depths that are still measured in feet, not miles. So yeah, we're able to make use of, right off the shore and stuff, but we're not going out in the middle of the Pacific and going down and like drilling stuff out of the bottom of the ocean, right? We're scratching the surface of the Earth and a minority of the surface of the Earth when it comes down to it, right? So if we are able to do truly deep ocean floor mining, for example, the natural resources that would become available if we achieve that technologically would expand so dramatically, right? That's most of the Earth's surface is way deep down there, and we generally can't do much with it. He says, today, man can more easily mine at a depth of 1,000 feet than he could in the past at a depth of 10 feet. Thanks to such advances as mechanical powered drilling equipment, high explosives, steel structural supports for mine shafts, and modern pumps and engines. Today, a single worker operating a bulldozer or a steam shovel can move far more earth than hundreds of workers in the past using hand shovels. Advances in reduction methods have made it possible to obtain pure ores from compounds previously either altogether impossible to work with or at least too costly to work with. Improvements in shipping, railroad building, and highway construction have made possible low-cost access to high-grade mineral deposits in regions previously inaccessible or too costly to exploit. So we've been able to drill deeper. We've been able to work with the resources of the Earth more efficiently with bulldozers, big equipment. And with, we've talked about it a bit on the show, I think the container revolution, shipping container revolution, it's become way cheaper to bring us stuff from all over the world than it was even like 60, 70 years ago. The container revolution is quite new in history, and it just revolutionized the ability of our ability to move things around, and therefore have access to regions that in the past it just would have been too expensive. And so the very useful rare earth things that were there, rare earth minerals or whatever, just sat there. It was just too expensive to get to them. And now we can. So there is no limit to the further advances that are possible. Hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe, may turn out to be an economical source of fuel in the future. Atomic and hydrogen explosives, lasers, satellite detection systems, space travel itself open up limitless new possibilities for increasing the supply of economically usable mineral supplies. Advances in mining technology that would make it possible to mine economically at a depth of, say, 10,000 feet, instead of the present much more limited depths, or to mine beneath the oceans, would so increase the portion of the Earth's mass accessible to man that all previous supplies of accessible minerals would appear insignificant in comparison. So, what's the point? The point is the supply of economically usable, accessible natural resources is expandable. We can do something about it. The general picture you get from the environmentalist, the modern environmentalist, is that we are just helpless as we use up the very last of the reserves, and then Mad Max time comes, right? But Reisman's point is that's not true. We're surrounded by infinite resources, and we can use more of them by using our minds and through economic progress, saving and capital accumulation, which allows us to build, better tools, better equipment, and so forth. So man will succeed in progressively enlarging the fraction of nature's contribution that constitutes goods. That is, he will succeed in progressively enlarging the supply of usable, accessible natural resources. Why is Reisman confident about this? And of course, we can be extremely foolish and nuke ourselves or whatever, right? So, but if we kind of keep going roughly like we're going, even with some trouble, political trouble, two things. The stock of scientific and technical knowledge grows from generation to generation, right? You begin with the knowledge that came before, and you add fresh contributions, and it grows. Stock of capital goods grows from generation to generation. One more sentence, Menmer. On the basis of both progressively growing knowledge of nature and progressively growing physical power over nature, so number 3 and number 4 on Monger's list, man progressively enlarges the fraction of nature that constitutes goods. Isn't that beautiful? You had a comment?
No, I muted myself because I coughed. Oh. Go ahead. Oh. Sorry for the confusion.
Madmerk is keep staying with us through his sickness.
Yes, sorry, folks. If I was to comment, I would say the environmentalist movement is flawed in its thinking, very similar to how Malthusian economics is flawed. For those who don't know, we actually did a show on Malthusian economics. I encourage everyone to go watch it if they want more of an in-depth understanding. But what I would say is that Malthus had the idea that population would outstrip food production, and therefore there would be a mass starvation of many millions of people. And his solution to this is that we should allow a certain slower starvation of amount of people, particularly the Irish, in his opinion, in order to prevent this and decrease population. Now, obviously, we know today that food production has increased significantly, outstripping population. In fact, obesity is a huge issue today. So he was wrong. Why was he wrong? Well, he's wrong for the same fundamental reason that many environmentalists today are wrong, in that they don't see how individuals using reason and knowledge can expand their ability for the production of new goods. So we now have greater fertilization efforts that allows us to have greater crop yields and more crop seasons, so they produce more, and we have genetically modified crops so that they are more nutritious and last longer. In the same way that Malthus is wrong about food production, the environmentalists are wrong about the production of goods, consumable lower order goods, from higher order goods that the Earth's natural resources provide. The unfortunate part, as we highlight in that show, many people of influence still believe in these Malthusian lies. It is this economic mistake that has led many people down the path of hysteria and corruption and trying to influence other world leaders into their beliefs. Again, we won't go into it here, but I encourage everyone to go have a look at that episode, because we go into how.
Put it in the chat. A link to us on Malthus and all the Malthusians we still have with us. Go ahead.
Right. You can have as many graphs and we had to look at some of the graphs that many of these groups. I won't give away what groups. You'll have to go look at the episode to find out, but many of these groups use to justify their beliefs. And while it looked very pretty and it looked very scientific, it comes back to the question of, is it good economics? Is it correct economics? And the foundation that it rested on was ultimately false and flawed. And it is the same here.
You got to think things through, and that's what's great about Monger. This Aristotelian emphasis in Monger's thinking, which he brought to the Austrian school, is they think about things in a very fundamental way, and not a hand-wavy way, but a very careful, logical way. And it really leads you to different results than people who are like, oh, we're going to run out of everything. Could you spell that out? Okay, so let's continue through this. So now he's going to talk about the next aspect of Monger's theory of goods, which he's referred to, right? The process of production as one of continuous enhancement of utility as it moves from goods of higher order to goods of lower order, right? The process of production and the whole of economic activity, so far from constituting a danger to man's environment, as the environmentalists claim, have the inherent tendency to improve his environment. Indeed, that is their essential purpose, right? So when we look at that value creation as we go from raw materials to the thing we actually want to buy, you could call that environmental improvement, right? That's maybe not how we've usually been taught to think about environmental improvement. Environmental improvement, we've been taught to think about it as getting rid of people and the signs of people that we exist and going back to just the earth as it is, right? But our revealed preference show that what we really want is we want to use the environment to meet our needs, right? We want to have good medicines to address sicknesses. We want to have good food. We want to be able to travel. All these things, these are the things we really want. You know, it's the revealed preference problem, right? You ask people and they're like, yeah, I think man is a virus and we should just leave animals to gallop around in raw nature, you know? But when you actually look at the decisions they make in their life, it's more like they would like, rare earth minerals to be mined out of Africa so they can have their damn iPhone, right? That's really what you see people doing with their actions. Not only does the entire world physically consist of nothing but chemical elements, but these elements are never destroyed. They simply reappear in different combinations, in different proportions, in different places. Apart from what has been lost in a few rockets, the quantity of every chemical element in the world today is the same as it was before the Industrial Revolution. The only difference is that because of the Industrial Revolution, instead of lying dormant out of man's control, the chemical elements have been moved about, as never before, in such a way as to improve human life and well-being. Some part of the world's iron and copper has been moved from the interior of the earth where it was useless to now constitute buildings, bridges, automobiles, and 1,000,001 other things of benefit to human life. Some part of the world's carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen has been separated from certain compounds and recombined in others, in the process releasing energy to heat and light homes, power industrial machinery, automobiles, airplanes, ships, and railroad trains, and in countless other ways serve human life. It is an improvement in his environment when man builds bridges, digs canals, opens mines, clears land, constructs factories and houses, or does anything else that represents an improvement in the external material conditions of his life. So what I like about this, I know it probably grates, I'm just hearing Morgoth grinding his teeth right now, right? It grates against that Tolkienian love of just sort of nature unto itself, right? But think about it. What he's doing here, Reisman, is he's centering value on humans, right? It's profoundly a humanist way of looking at things. We do these things, some of which, aesthetically, admittedly, maybe we don't love the look of a mine, right? Maybe it's not the most beautiful way that land could look, right? If that's what we wanted, it was just purely for everything to be sort of natural and left untouched and all that. But by doing that, digging that mine and getting those things out, we're able to make the environment be what we need it to be as humans. As humans, we need bridges, right? We need to farm and grow food. We need houses. I live in a part of the world where it is way too hot at the worst part of the summer and way too cold at the worst part of the winter to be outside, and maybe we should stop abusing the earth and all go back to the equator where we don't need houses or hardly clothes, right? But for those of us who like where we live, that isn't the equator, we need these things, right? So,
right.
One last sentence. Production and economic activity are precisely the means by which man adapts his environment to himself and thereby improves it. So we've been sold a bill of goods that economic activity is destroying the environment, and Reisman is saying, no. I mean, as long as it's done properly, and we'll see what that means in a moment, as long as it's done properly, it's improving the environment in the only way that matters. It's improving the environment for us, right? For the people, the people we love and our children and the generations to come. That's what matters. That's improving the environment. Go ahead.
Right. Now, what we're not saying is strip mine everything, leave everything barren, and just try to innovate, even though that does help. What we are saying is people can get a certain, like, I'm a bit of a greenie, as in I like being in the country, I like being in the environment. I don't particularly enjoy the city. But then there is a certain amount of aesthetic pleasure and it's subjective pleasure that individuals get from being in nature, from being in that environment. We aesthetic is one of the core elements of humans' ability to reason with the world, philosophy and all that sort of stuff. Aesthetic is a very important part of that. But that doesn't mean that we don't use any of the resources as well. We come back to this sort of Aristotelian viewpoint, not using the planet at all is at one extreme, and completely strip mining and only not innovating and not doing any of the necessary requirements of actually protecting the environment, and rather just sticking with our current technology and using the resources for our current technology and our current standpoint, and then we will actually run out of resources. They have that at one extreme at one side and the other extreme at that side. And what we're saying is go down the middle, innovate, expand time horizons, have greater uses for those higher order goods. And that's how you solve the environmental question here. It's that middle ground. And the way you foster that environment to have innovation, to have expanded time horizons.
Right, and clearly something that a lot of people value, as you and I just said, a lot of people value, beautiful views and being able to walk in the woods. And so, in fact, that is one of the things that the economy provides, right? Parks and in fact, as we become more efficient with our farmland, a tremendous amount of land in the United States every year goes back to nature. Most people don't know that. They think we're just using more and more land. We're actually using less and less land because we use it so efficiently at this point for agriculture that we don't need as much of it. And so marginal land that's not that great for farming, or at least not for modern farming, is just going back to woods all over the United States. This has been going on for decades.
This is a very Aristotelian view of the world that we're promoting here in the middle ground. Find the balance. Right.
Yeah. But he's saying the way to find the balance is through freedom, right? Okay.
Exactly.
But I don't want to sound cliched. He's going to explain exactly how that works. So how could the environmentalists miss the fact that it's actually production and economic activity that improve the environment? And he says, well, the reason, and I want to pause here and note that he's about to do something that's very different than how Mises tended to be. Mises tended to assume, we all have the same goals. You guys just need to understand economics so that you understand that you're using the wrong means to achieve those goals. Okay, that's sort of a typical Mises attitude to take as he's sort of arguing or critiquing. He says, yeah, we all want the same thing, right? We want people to be doing well and so on and so forth. You just need to understand that laissez-faire is the way to achieve that end. Well, here Reisman doesn't do that. He says, no. The problem is environmentalists have different values. They don't share Monger's values. They don't share Western civilization's starting point of value, the value of human life and well-being. In their view, the starting point of value is the alleged intrinsic value of nature. That is the value of nature in and of itself, totally apart from any connection to human life and well-being. Such alleged intrinsic value is destroyed every time man changes anything whatever in the pre-existing state of nature. So in a humanistic or human-centered view, Reisman says, these changes we make to nature are improving the environment, namely the environment for us, right? For humans. But in the environmentalist point of view, this is terrible because what we really want is we just want humans to stop messing around and just leave nature alone so that the earth can just sit there with no people, I guess, ultimately. He says environmentalists are eager to sacrifice human life and well-being for the preservation of these alleged intrinsic values. Now, this is where Reisman shows that he's not at all unconcerned about the issue of, what we talk about, like pollution, right? To use the economists speak for a moment, negative externalities, right? Somebody's making something that we do really want, but they're, polluting the neighborhood, which we don't want, right? So how do we deal with that? Well, guarantees that the positive benefits of production and economic activity incalculably outweigh any negatives associated with their byproducts is the principle of respect for individual rights. If I wish to construct a building, not only will I benefit from it, but also all those who work for me in its construction, all those who supply me with materials and equipment for constructing it. So too will the building's purchaser or tenants, if I construct it for the purpose of sale or rent. In addition, no third party's property or person may be harmed by my action. For example, I risk serious legal penalty if I construct my building in a way that undermines a neighboring building's foundation, or which makes my building unsafe for passersby, right? So this is part of why the property rights thing is so, we keep hammering on this as Austrian economists. It's the property rights that keep us doing things that are overall beneficial, right? You might personally just want the whole world to burn so that you can live alone, right? And that would be of great benefit to you, but it wouldn't really benefit everybody else, right? Well, on a smaller scale, when you violate other people's rights, you're kind of doing that in a small way, right? You're saying what I want can be done at the expense of others, and we don't go for that. It's the way that the market achieves these good outcomes and not bad outcomes is by the respect of property rights. And when the government allows some company to get away with negative externalities, I'm thinking now of, I have to be careful on YouTube, companies who make products that could be harmful. And when those products are indeed harmful, the government has protected them from being sued, let us say. That's just the sort of thing that messes up the market process and gives bad results instead of the good results that Reisman's describing here. Okay, and then he makes an argument here which I think is wrong. This is the thing I discussed with David Gordon, and I think David agreed with me that there's a misstep here. But I don't think it's central. We'll get past it quick. He says, he's talking about this issue of bad effects like global warming or ozone depletion, where it's not that like one person or one company is doing it, it's that all of us are doing a little, which adds up to a big effect, right? And so his argument is the individual should not be punished for consequences that can occur only as the result of the actions of the broader category or group of which he is a member, but do not occur as the result of his own actions. So even if it is true that the combined effect of the actions of several billion people really is to cause global warming or ozone depletion, even if that's true, it still would not follow that any proper basis existed for prohibiting any specific individual or individuals from acting in ways that only when aggregated across billions of individuals resulted in global warming or ozone depletion or whatever. I'm not totally sure I buy that argument, but I think this makes a lot of sense. He says the proper way to regard these collective outcomes of individual action is to regard them as equivalent to acts of nature. That is, they're equivalent to actions not morally caused by human beings at all, because no one's intending for this cumulative effect to happen, right? And he says, go with him for a second. If you take this approach, by following this principle, man will deal with any negative forces of nature resulting as a byproduct of his own activity in the aggregate in the same successful way that he regularly deals with all other things of nature, right? So just like in Japan, they build buildings that are ready to deal with earthquakes. I've seen some of the designs. It's quite clever what they do because they have earthquakes, right? So they have invested capital, used brilliant ideas and engineering to deal with the effects of earthquakes, which we didn't cause and they just happen. He says, well, let's say we collectively did cause it. We can deal with that in the same way that we deal with other things, right? Other things that are just natural and not caused by man. So he says the environmentalists are ready to throw all the good things of industrial civilization away because they allege it causes global warming and ozone depletion, that is, bad weather. And the best way, they say, for us to avoid such bad weather and thus to control nature more to our advantage is to abandon modern industrial civilization and capitalism. Well, there's a big problem with that, right? Go ahead.
I was just wondering, is he suggesting this is perhaps what's the phrase? The tragedy of the commons situation?
It's a little trickier than that, in fact.
Yeah, it may be a little bit more to it, but
it's like tragedy of the commons on a global scale, right? Like
right.
The percent that, let's assume global warming is real, right? The percent that any one of us, or even a big company, is contributing is infinitesimal, right? And if any one person or one company stops making that contribution to carbon in the atmosphere or whatever, it won't make a difference, because it's the cumulative effect of everyone on the planet. And he's saying in that case, when it's that kind of macro effect from just humanity being on Earth and being humanity, you might as well just consider it as if it's an act of God. You know, he wouldn't use that term because he's a Randian atheist, right? But an act of nature.
Right. Okay. So
yeah,
essentially, if it's an extreme form and an evolved form of the tragedy of the commons, then we already know the solution for this, which is the privatization of land and resources and the encouragement of innovation.
right. Yeah, no, that's right. The standard answer to tragedy of the commons is don't let it be a commons anymore. That's one way to handle it, right? Have someone own it so that they have an interest in the long-term value of the thing, whatever it is. Now, the atmosphere, global warming, that sounds a little trickier. But for waterways, I think it's just crazy that the waterways are not owned privately. I've got to experience a little bit of this on our honeymoon when we were in Sicily. And the beaches were like nothing I'd ever seen. The beaches were so nice. Like there were really nice chairs and it was clean. There weren't like cigarette butts stuck into the sand all over the place, you know? And this is a tourist area, right? A lot of people. I'm like, what is going on? Well, there'd be a restaurant or a little, you know, place you could buy stuff to eat on the beach, a little bit off the beach. And that part of the beach near them was essentially, I couldn't speak Italian to them, so I couldn't get the exact details, but essentially they had private ownership of that part of the beach. So they took care of it because they wanted you to enjoy being at their part of the beach, meaning you might come up and buy something from them, right? So they took responsibility for that part of the beach, and it wasn't yucky. It wasn't having this tragedy of the commons thing that we're so used to when we go to a park or a public beach or something like that. Well, in the same way, I think it'd be great if rivers and creeks were privately owned, and the owner of that could benefit from having a clean, nice river or creek because, you know, in my state, we do a lot of canoeing and floating and stuff like that. They'd have their floating company and they'd say, hey, you're going to have a great experience floating on my river because we keep it nice. And if somebody starts dumping toxic crap into the river, we sue them and we stop them, right? And we have an interest in keeping this nice. Instead, around the world, as far as I know, the government tends to own, governments of various sorts tend to own these things. And they're terrible. Walter Block, by the way, has a huge book on this very issue of privatizing water. Privatizing the waterways and so forth. Probably share that. Go ahead.
In Australia, we have a huge issue of there are certain riverways that connect interstate, and this has become a huge political issue because whoever has control of these riverways obviously has a huge economic advantage. And so each state actually has their own river management policy. And what it has done, because the land is owned by states and obviously they have their own incentives, the people there are absolutely suffering from a lack of water. And they're not able to irrigate their crops, and they're not able to allow their cattle and sheep and pigs to have water to actually drink. And this is all because of none of these governments are willing to work together on this issue because, well, if they were to concede on an issue, they might lose their claim to the waterways. Whereas if you actually had the government step aside and private individuals actually work this out, I think you would see that this river problem would disappear quite quickly because each one would have to take care of it. Each one has to work together because they have to live with their neighbors. And if one's being an ass and not allowing the water to go through, well, you got to answer for that, man, because you got to live with these people.
Right. Yeah, I shared the link to the book. Second one that got broke the first time. Water Capitalism, The Case for Privatizing Oceans, Rivers, Lakes, and Aquifers by Walter Block and Peter Nelson. And it's amazing, this book. Okay, so let's bring this home. The answer to the environmentalists is that the appropriate response to environmental change, whether it's global warming or a new ice age, is the economic freedom of a capitalist society. Sooner or later, such environmental change will occur. If not in this new century or even in this new millennium, then certainly at some time in the more remote future. At that time, it will require vast changes in human economic activity. Some areas presently used for certain purposes will become unusable for those purposes. Conceivably, they might even become uninhabitable. Other areas presently uninhabitable or barely habitable will become much more desirable. Major changes in the comparative advantages of vast areas will take place, to which people must be free to respond. The seeming difficulties of coping with global warming or any other large-scale change arise only when the problem is viewed from the perspective of government central planners. It would be too great a problem for government bureaucrats to handle, but it would certainly not be too great a problem for tens and hundreds of millions of free-thinking individuals living under capitalism to solve. It would be solved by means of each individual being free to decide how best to cope with the particular aspects of global warming that affected him. They would decide where it was now relatively more desirable to own land, locate farms and businesses, and live and work, and where it was relatively less desirable, and what new comparative advantages each location had for the production of which goods. Factories, stores, and houses all need replacement sooner or later. In the face of a change in the relative desirability of different locations, the pattern of replacement would be different. Perhaps some replacements would have to be made sooner than otherwise. The problem would be solved in exactly the same way that tens and hundreds of millions of free individuals have solved much greater problems, such as redesigning the economic system to deal with the replacement of the horse by the automobile, the settlement of the American West, and the release of the far greater part of the labor of the economic system from agriculture to industry. I love those examples he gave, because I often think about the fact that my great-grandparents, who I knew, were more at the agricultural stage. They both lived, well, my great-grandmother was alive when I was in my 20s, so I remember her very well. And she lived on a farm that had a well on it, and, you know, they hadn't had electricity when they first were there and so forth. So I'm not that far from a time when my family was in agriculture, right? And that's true of many of us, because this transition happened from a world historical perspective quite dramatically and quite dramatically quickly. In the United States, 86% or something like that of people were farmers just like 150 years ago. And now it's 3% or something like that. Well, that's a massive shift. You could just imagine a sort of environmentalist style doomsayer in the 19th century going, what are we going to do? There's not going to be any jobs. We're seeing the people leaving the farms, you know, it's not paying for people to farm like they used to. You know, chaos will ensue, anarchy in the streets, right? But in fact, the transition from agriculture to industry happened, you know, relatively smoothly. And now there's probably many of us who maybe don't particularly want to be farmers, even though our great-grandparents were. And we're kind of happy being programmers or whatever other thing, right?
In fact, we have innovated so much and we have advanced so much in comparison to our forebears that not only do we not need to, but as a requirement, live on the farm in order to have a sustainable life, a life that feeds ourselves. But we don't even need to go to the city as an alternative. We don't need to do that anymore. We don't need to go to the city for work. Everything can be done from home. And so the incentive for living in cities drops, especially cities that are highly dense. I'm thinking areas such as in India or in China. Again, technological innovation has allowed us to advance to a point where we can live more freely the lifestyles that we want to live. according to our subjective value system. Now, Redlib, I don't mean to push this forward, but let's get on. If we're not, I think we're just about at the end here, are we not?
Two more sentences. Let me just read
two more sentences. All right.
Where you want to take it?
I want to take us to the stars.
Yeah, exactly. A rational response, Reisman writes, to the possibility of large-scale environmental change is to establish the economic freedom of individuals to deal with it, if and when it comes. Capitalism and the free market are the essential means of doing this, not paralyzing government controls and environmentalism. And in that, I think he is totally right. Whatever comes, as he described, it's going to be the granular, fine-grained responses of individuals to what's going on that is going to be the best way to respond. Not some grand, central, global, God help us, global plan, that everybody in the globe shall do this. Everybody in the world shall not do that. This is not the way to handle things. I mean, surely we learn, no. As I often say on Twitter, we learn nothing from the 20th century, right? We learn nothing. All the central planning, all the piles of bodies, environmental disaster in the Soviet Union, we learn nothing from it. We just want to adopt a bigger central plan on a larger scale to deal with our concerns about the environment. It's just madness. Okay, anyway, so go ahead.
This time, I promise you, Redlib, the bodies will be stacked high enough that we can see beyond our horizons. I promise you this time. But no, apart from that very dark joke, where I wanted to take this is, we talked briefly before about the use of our resources and how nature, we've only tapped into such a limited degree of the resources even available to us on Earth. Well, we are reaching a point, and I think we're at the baby stages of it, but probably within my lifetime, and certainly within my kids' lifetime, assuming that nothing bad happens. And that's a pretty big assumption. But assuming that nothing bad happens, we could be reaching to the stars. And Radlib, in the private chat, I linked you a report, or a paper rather, that suggests how we can start to look to the stars and what resources we can use there. So what are the incentives, for example, of conducting intergalactic space mining? And I'm not just being like, oh, we're throwing big terms out there. No, I mean quite serious. There are quite a few resources, not only on planets, but on asteroids, very large asteroids. If you were to able to access those resources, for example, there is a ton of compressed carbon that we call diamonds out there in asteroids. There is a ton of gases out there that can be used. There are entire gas planets that if we had access to, we could use that resource for the rest of time.
So is this like NASA, the National Space Society, or is this more like a private organization?
I think they're a private organization, if I'm remembering this correctly. This was actually quite a while ago that I found this, but from the help of a friend, actually, my best friend in real life, he's very much into this space exploration, and he got me onto this, and I have to give him a quick shout out because this truly is innovative what people are doing. Think about Elon Musk's projects. I understand he's a bit of a meme, but he is the bleeding edge of these innovations.
Let me just share some of the section headings here to give people a taste. I've shared the link in the chat. First, they talk about general barriers to space settlement, like what's in our way of being able to really use space, right? Then utilization and development of cislunar space. So that would be the space above the atmosphere, but within the orbit of the moon, I believe. Then what about the moon itself? having a settlement on the moon and so forth, and then Mars, and then asteroid mining and orbital space settlements. So they're thinking big here. It's really cool stuff.
Right. Let's focus on the astro mining for a second.
Mm-hmm.
If we're actually able to, let's say we find a new element, which is not impossible. Let's say we find a new element in the universe. Well, then we're back at the stage of the Stone Age discovering iron for the first time.
Right.
And what can we do with it? Well, we don't know. We haven't tried it yet. And that's where innovation happens. That's the bleeding edge of innovation and the formation of new products and how we can create new things and create value for our subjective needs. And then that becomes that element that we just found becomes a new higher order good.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some people in the chat being like, oh, this libertarian sort of we can grow forever thing. I don't like it. Well, I think Reisman is just right. I invite you to defeat his logic, right? I think he's right in his view of the natural resources of the earth, and how we can have been and will continue to turn them more and more to our use over time. I would say that the barrier that we have is, ourselves, by which I mean politics, really, right? I think that's really the problem. Politics has been holding us back from space, in my view. I think governments for a long time kind of monopolized that. More recently, there's been SpaceX and so forth, and they've been starting to actually find cheaper, more affordable ways than the government had been coming up with for putting things in space and so forth.
Like being able to land the rocket.
Yep, right.
Have you seen that footage? That's so cool.
So as we get government out of the way, I think private industry will find ways when it seemed like there was no way, when all you had was government central planners doing it. Well, let's hit one super chat. I think we have real quick.
By the way, guys, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Feel free to send more super chats because this is super chat time.
Right. Obviously, we encourage super chats, but please keep in mind, guys, we are looking at alternatives for super chat. We understand that some people do not want to give Alphabet any sort of money, and we fully understand that. So we are working on other resources so people can do super chats, stuff like Entropy. We encourage people to use Entropy once it's set up.
Yeah.
So please, we understand if you're not doing super chats at the moment, but at least support the show. Drop a like, subscribe, hit the bell button, all that sort of stuff. If you don't want to do a super chat because you don't want to give Alphabet money, we support the show in other ways.
Yep, Subscribe Star is a great way to support us. It's
Ike said check out Subscribe Star tips for his comment. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. I will. Awesome. Well, let's start with Sam153. He says, excellent discussion. Thank you, sir. Subscribe Star tips. This sounds like a great way for people to. Okay, give me just a moment. I'm not logged in right now for some reason. Okay, here we go.
Thank you, Sam, by the way.
Yes, thank you, Sam. And I just need to find this. Sorry, this is new. Current price subscribers. Oh, here we go. Yeah, in fact, let me acknowledge one from, it doesn't show a date. Oh, there we go. This is from December 7th. I don't know if we ever acknowledged this. The deconstructive DM says, for the silver pot, capitalism ho, lads. And he gave us $25. So that was a nice contribution.
Yeah, we should have. We are sorry, sir, or madam. We have acknowledged you.
We're learning this. So thanks to Ike for drawing attention. I don't know if I'd even noticed that before, but that's great. Ike Broflovsky says there's a new power line being built in Maine to send clean energy to Massachusetts from Canada. Rural Mainers don't want, but it's getting pushed through. So much for a nice habitat. Yeah, and of course that's one of the things that happens is that eminent domain is used by the state, so that instead of it being a win-win, property rights being respected, you get these win-lose situations where, it's great for Massachusetts to get their energy from Canada, right? But meanwhile, they've just got a power line shooting through beautiful Maine, and the people who actually live there, well, it's either eminent domain or, in the United States at least, the federal and state government owns so much land, which is just crazy, right? They never really, it's not just ownership. They didn't homestead it. They just declared themselves to be owners of vast swathes of the United States. I mean, huge areas. You're thinking I'm complaining about little things. No. There are states out in the West where most of the state, 80% of the state, 90% of the state is owned by the federal government, which is not right. And it results in stuff like this, where if the people who lived there owned it, then they might want to do that. It might make economic sense for them, right, to run a power line through. They might do it differently. They might do it in a way that's more aesthetically pleasing, like burying the line or making it less obtrusive, right? So private ownership is going to give you very different impacts on the environment and better impacts. Anyway, Ike, thanks so much for doing that through Subscribestar.
We actually
more money goes to us. So.
Yes, we actually did one of our very first episodes was about homesteading and some of these environmental causes. I have no idea which one it is, but if you go through our catalog, you can probably find it, and you can learn more about environmental homesteading and property rights and the ideas of companies versus homeowners and who has the right to what land and which takes priority. Hint, it's the first one to get there.
Right. And do something with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt says almost all of South Florida is reserve. Yeah, I think I kind of knew about that from driving. I was born in Miami, and then one set of grandparents retired over to the Gulf side. And so I would drive from the Gulf side. One set of grandparents was at the Gulf, one set of grandparents and cousins was over on the Atlantic. And I'd drive through, and it's just swamp, park swamp. I don't know, mostly, and some Native American tribes live there. Yeah.
So good casinos then.
Ike gives more information here. Shilling the feature. You can tip in Subscribestar like a super chat. You don't have to pay monthly. So yeah, most people think of Subscribestar, which is great, as something where you, right now it's just $5 a month. I think that's the only option I've made available. $5 a month to support the show. And those regular subscribers are really huge for us to get that regular income coming in. But he points out that you can do the tip, which is just a super chat through Subscribestar. So I am going to save that link and bring that up in the future now that Ike has made a point of it. Thank you. Because I have my little thing where I bring up the channel monetization on YouTube and look at super chats. And now I'll bring this up to check for tips. People can start using that. And eventually we'll get some other options going as well. Okay, so let's wrap it up. You will be off the show next week from stuff you're doing. And if I could really get on the ball, that would be probably a great time, just like this last time you weren't available, to try to get one of these Mises Institute guests that I lined up. While I was at the Institute at the conference this spring, I didn't line up a ton, but between one thing and another, we probably got 5 or 6 people lined up to come on the show. Not specific plans, but they're ready to come on. We generally know what the topic would be. So it's just a matter of starting to go through the Rolodex there and see who's available next week. And maybe that's what I'll do is do one of the guests. Sound okay, Menmer?
That sounds fine to me. I was actually... Oh, this is going to get too personal. Thank you, Dagbay. very kind.
Yeah,
I was actually thinking, guys, what I'm going through right now is quite important to me. This is gonna get very soppy and very emotional, but what I'm going through now is very important to me, and I'm trying my best to fulfill a dream of mine that since I've had since a little boy. I would appreciate your best wishes and prayers in my endeavors, especially for next week.
All right, will do.
Yeah, it's a bit nerve-wracking for me. I understand this is no context for anyone. It is a bit nerve-wracking for me, but I am going to try my best to fulfill my dream.
All right, awesome. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Sorry I don't have an announcement of what will be exactly next week, but I'll try to probably share that on Twitter, or maybe I should use my community thing on YouTube because everyone would see that. All the subscribers would see that. I haven't been very good at using that. But thanks, everybody. I hope you found this interesting. Like I said, I heard this talk live when George Reisman gave it 20 years ago, and I was just blown away. I love these kinds of things that take the paradigm and just destroy it. The paradigm that's been shoved down our throats constantly in cartoons and in every which way, right? It takes that paradigm, completely destroys it, and gives us something that's not just a better, more accurate vision of the world, but I think inspiring, like Matt Merck was talking about space and stuff like that. I mean, whether it's space at the bottom of the ocean or maybe something a little less dramatic, the point is there's places to go and things to do that are good and that will help everybody. So, all right. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye, all.